Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to We Were There. I am Judith Pucci. I am a Tribute Museum walking tour guide. And we at Tribute, we are survivors. We are family members. We are first responders. Some of us, including me, lived here in Lower Manhattan. Others of us volunteered during the cleanup. So our stories go beyond the historical events of the day, and they express more of the personal costs of the attacks. So you're going to hear today two stories, and they are going to be told to you by Desiree Boucher and Jeanette Gutierrez. Now, Jeanette, who is at the far end, on September 11th, Jeanette worked for Lehman Brothers, a financial services firm. Her office was across the street from the North Tower. That was the first building to be attacked. Desiree worked for Aon Consulting, a provider of risk management services for global companies. Her office was in the second building attacked, the South Tower. And Desiree was located above the point of impact. She was on the 101st floor, so she was very close to the top of the building. Each of the towers was 110 floors. Before Jeanette tells you her story, I'm just going to quickly set the scene for you. At about 8:45 that morning, people here along the west side of Lower Manhattan began to look up to the sky. Their attention was captured by a low-flying plane and the booming sound of its engines. We here in Lower Manhattan occasionally do hear the engines of a jet plane, but it sounds very distant and very subtle. There was nothing subtle about this engine. It was loud, it was raw, and it felt like it was just on the top of your head. Jeanette was used to the custom of arriving early to work. So she was already at her desk when hijacked Flight 11 is flown into the North Tower. And that building, as I said, just directly across the street from where her office was.
So to continue to paint that picture, at 8:46 a.m. when the North Tower was struck, I heard it and I felt it. Every morning I get in really early. I call my older sister who worked not too far from here by the Brooklyn Bridge, and we would just chat and catch up. That morning I had already had my conversation with her, but at 8:46, when that happened, I knew something was up. And I called her and I said, Gail, I think something's going on down here. She called me back and said, you know, a plane hit the World Trade Center, a commuter plane. It was an accident. I'm like, oh. Now, I heard that noise. It really didn't scare me too much because you hear crazy things in Manhattan all the time. As long as it's not gunshots, it's not a big deal to me. But when I looked out the window and I saw the gaping hole and the black smoke pouring out, that's when there's something really wrong. But I wasn't afraid. And after she told me that it was a commuter plane, I really wasn't afraid at all. I was upset though because I knew there were people who were hurt and most certainly dead across the street. And I went back to work. What am I going to do? And at 9:03, 17 minutes later, when the second tower was struck, I didn't hear it, and I didn't know it happened until my sister called me back and told me 2 World Trade was hit. She was very calm, because she's a calm kind of person. I'm not. And she's like, you need to get out of there. She knew exactly what was going on. I was clueless. And I was like, no, I don't think I really want to go out there. And they had come over the loudspeaker in my building to stay where we were, which made sense because 2 110-story buildings were being evacuated. They didn't need us out there. I was safe. I was fine. Who would want me dead? So I was not arguing with her, but she was insisting, and I was saying no. And then finally I agreed because my mother did teach me to listen to my older sister, and thank God I listened. And she also taught my sister to take care of her baby sister, and thank God she listened. So I left the building, not in any apparent rush. Again, I don't think that I'm in any kind of danger. And when I get down to the lobby of my building, I notice, which it's usually empty, it's filled with people, and some of them are bleeding. I remember like it was yesterday, a man sitting on the marble floor with blood dripping down his head, and he had a blue suit on and a tie, and I thought, why is that bleeding man here? I just couldn't comprehend what was going on. When I left the building, I really didn't see what was going on. It was like I was looking through the eye of a needle, because my mind knew, and I know this now, I didn't know it then, that it could not handle what was going on. So I just focused on meeting my sister. When I got to our meeting point, that's when I guess reality set in. And when I saw my big sister, who I knew was going to take care of me, I was hysterical. And she's like, all right, let's go. She was not very nice. At least I didn't think so. And we walked north, got as far as 34th Street, and jumped in a cab to 42nd Street. I didn't know when the towers collapsed. I didn't know anything like that. I had no commentary. I didn't have any idea about the Pentagon or the plane in Pennsylvania. So until I watched it on TV, I had no idea what was going on. Fast forward, because I could talk about 9/11 for hours. I get home much later that night, and in watching TV, I see so many people and so many firefighters and police being extremely heroic. And I couldn't imagine being in that position. I'm not that kind of person. I'm really not. I'm a chicken. And I wondered what made a person go into a burning building when everybody else is running out. I can't answer that. What makes a person leave their office and instead of going home to their children, come towards what everybody's running away from? I still can't answer that, but my sister can. And I asked her many years later, why didn't you just go home to the kids? I don't have kids. And she said, well, I couldn't go home because what was I going to tell mommy? And I'm like, oh, well, that's a good answer. I'm glad, because if not for her, I most certainly would not be here today. I would have stayed in my office. I probably would have had my face against the window. I wouldn't have been outside trying to help anybody because, like I said, I'm a chicken. But I don't think I'd be here. So when you think about, I'm labeled a survivor. Yes, I survived that day, but my story is really not about survival. My story is about heroism. And it's more about the fact that not all heroes wear uniforms. Sometimes they're just your big sister. And I learned through tribute that bravery is not just about running into a burning building. Sometimes bravery is just standing here talking about it. So thank you.
You may be wondering why Jeanette said she might not be here. She's in a building that's across the street. The reason is when the North Tower collapses, the building she's in, if the North Tower is here, you have the West Side Highway here, and then Jeanette's building is basically over here. When the North Tower comes down, you have 110 floors, steel, glass, everything that was a trade center. Those buildings collapsed in 10 to 12 seconds. So 110 floors came down that quickly. That created, among many other things, a wind force that came pushing out in all directions. So you have flaming debris, you have steel, you have glass flying out, and you have this wind force. That wind force blew in the windows of most of the buildings surrounding the Trade Center. She said she would probably have been at a window watching. That window would have exploded into her face. So very likely she is correct. She could have not been here, or she could have been here, and her life today would have been very different from what it is now. As we here in New York City, we're trying to understand what had just happened to us. The North Tower is hit. And as people around the world, and this includes many of you, you are now hearing that the World Trade Center has been attacked. This is overwhelming to all of us. And then what happens? A second plane. A second plane appears. And this is broadcast, as you all know, live, worldwide. Many of you saw this. If you watched Flight 175 being flown into the South Tower, what you were looking at was the building in which Desiree worked.
So thank you for coming and hearing our stories, because we do need to tell them. You got me going. So my story is, as Judith said, I am a survivor. I worked on the 101st floor of the South Tower. Now, like Jeanette, I go to work early. So I was actually at my desk at 8 o'clock that morning. And so when the American Airlines Flight 11 goes into the North Tower at 8:46, I was as far away as you could be, and I heard boom. It was just a very slight boom. What had distressed me is that I had been working on a PowerPoint presentation, did not hit save, and you know what happens when you don't hit the save button. And the lights went off, the computer went off, but everything came right back on, and we thought, okay, a transformer blew, because that's what happens here in New York. We have a lot of transformers that blow. And then it came right back on, until you looked outside, and what had been a beautiful, beautiful day. The sky was clear, it was blue, was turning brown and gray, and paper was swirling outside the window. I'm on the 101st floor. Paper shouldn't be swirling outside our window. My telephone rang, and I went into my office to answer it, and it was my mother, and she had called, or actually I had called her because I knew something was happening. I had heard that a bomb had gone off, and she said to me, "Are you leaving?" And I said, "Yes, why?" And she says, "Well, I think you need to leave." And I said I would. To be honest with you, that thought hadn't even entered my head. I hadn't even thought to leave. But I am a dutiful daughter, so I said I would go downstairs and call her when I got to the lobby. I am a New Jerseyan, I am not a New Yorker. I don't worry about bullets flying around. So I commute, so I needed to pack my bag. I needed my train ticket, I needed my path ticket, I needed my book to read, because you don't go anywhere on public transportation in New York without some sort of reading material. And I packed my bag. And I noticed when I looked up that Jim, our office manager, had walked by. He had heard me earlier say that that something was wrong, and he was coming by to tell us that his wife had just called him. She was watching TV. It was interrupted with the news that a plane had gone into the North Tower, and that made sense to us, because when you work on the 101st floor of one of these buildings, planes flew below us. Helicopters flew below us. If on a winter's day it was snowing outside the window and I needed to run an errand outside the building, I took my umbrella because it would be raining by the time I hit the street. That a little putt-putt plane didn't quite make it to Newark Airport kind of made sense to us. I had finished packing my bag to leave, and I looked up again and I noticed Jim and some of my coworkers walking past. Looked like Mama Duck and her ducklings. And I got out of my office and I joined the parade. Now, each of these buildings was 1 acre large. These were very large buildings, each floor. And we walked from the south side to the west side to the north side. We went up to the windows, we looked out, we looked up, down, around. We didn't see anything, but we couldn't see anything from our angle. We couldn't see where the plane had gone into the other building. It was at that point Jim said, "Time to go home." And we thought, this is great. It's not even 9 a.m. and we were headed home. Or at the very least, we would go downstairs, have a cup of coffee, and come back when we got the all clear. I do remember one thing, though, as I walked that perimeter, and I walked 2/3 of that floor. There's nobody on the floor. We begin work at 8:30, so people should have been on the floor. But nobody was on the west or the north side of our building. And I said to my coworkers later, "Did you not make it in? Where were you?" And they said, "No, Desiree, we were there." We felt the heat of the airplane parts as they went past our windows. Paper on our desk became charred. They got up immediately, evacuated. And those of us who sat on the south or the east part of our building didn't even know what was going on. We were clueless. But Jim said, "Time to go home." And I headed towards the elevators, because that's how I knew I was leaving the building. And I watched Jim go down the corridor to do a last sweep of the floor. He wanted to make sure everybody knew who was left, that they needed to get off that floor. Jim did not make it out. Now, the way these buildings were constructed, there were 99 elevators in each building. So you would come in the morning, go through security, and depending on where you worked, depended on which elevators you took. These were massive elevators. They held 55 people. And they went either to the 44th floor or the 78th floor sky lobbies. I work on the 101st floor. I would have gone straight to the 78th floor sky lobby, gotten out on that floor and transferred to a local elevator that would have then gone on to 101. So that morning I'm on 101, quickly made it down to the 78th floor sky lobby, and it was packed with people. They guesstimate at least 400 people were waiting on that lobby for the elevators to take them down to the lower lobby level. Now, it was very noisy. There were a lot of joking going on. People were trying to make cell phone calls, but cell phones weren't working that day. The one thing I did not feel was panic. There was nothing wrong with our building. Everything that was happening in the other building. But there were announcements going on the PAs asking people to return to their offices because it was secure in our building. I didn't hear those announcements. I do know I managed to get onto one of the last elevators that took me down to the 78th floor from the 78th floor down to the lower level. And when we got down there, it would have been so easy just to go out onto Liberty Street, just to exit the building. But the police and the fire department were there, and they, for our safety, because there were fires going on across the street, asked us to go down, further down into the mall to find another exit out. I and 3 of my coworkers did manage to make it out onto Liberty Street. We went through the mall and out of Tower 4 and out onto Liberty. And when we got out, we took about 10 steps, and it was reinforced in my mind it must have been a mail plane that hit the other tower, because all you saw littered on the ground was mail, FedEx envelopes, DHL, UPS. There were just mail everywhere. We took about 10 steps when Ingrid yelled, "Run." To this day, she doesn't know why she said it, but I can tell you the time was 9:03. At 9:03 is when United 175 went into our building. And I know that 176 of my coworkers lost their lives, 19 from my floor. In total, here at the World Trade Center, 2,753 people were killed.
Not knowing what was happening inside the towers was not unusual. Even if you were in the North Tower and you were evacuating, depending on where you were in that building, you might not have known that it was a plane that had been flown high up into that building. So very often, for many people, you who were watching on television actually understood much more than people who were here in the towers that morning, until, of course, they evacuated, got home, and then heard themselves from television. So we're going to open this up to all of you now. So please, what would you like to know? They would be very happy to answer your questions. We have one ground rule, everyone, and the ground rule is you must not be shy. Okay? So who's going to be bold, brave? Ooh, I love it. Good.
That's a question. I know sometimes in disasters it takes a while. Like you said, you got tunnel vision. Did you remember things even like much later on just because of the trauma? Went through an earthquake and that happened to me. I used to know something like happened to you where you realized it happened certainly, but then later on was it just you started remembering things you couldn't even forget? Do you remember anything like that?
Yes and no. I do know I was probably a zombie for 14 months. If you ask me, and people would, how are you? I'm fine. I was perfectly all right. I was alive. I was fine. It wasn't until 14 months later I realized I wasn't. Things came back. I'm very fortunate I don't remember my dreams, because people said you remember things when you dream. I have no dreams. I don't remember my dreams. I was very fortunate in that way. But little things, when you talk to other people, little things came back.
People tell me now, oh, you called me that day? I don't remember that. Yeah. But as far as the day is not what traumatized me. It was days that followed that traumatized me. And I shut them completely out. My company moved Midtown. For 8 years, I never came downtown. I was happy that I never came downtown, and put it all away in a dark, quiet place. Never told my story, never spoke to my sister about it, ever. And then in 2010, I got a new job right across the street again. And this whole thing was being built here. And I had to face the devil every day, going down the same escalator I went down that day. And so I had the fortunate experience of deciding to do a tour with the Tribute Center. And my tour guide was Desiree.
Ah.
And she was a mess that day too. And I said, why do you even do that to yourself? Like, that's torture. She's like, it's very healing. You should try it. And I was like, she's out of her mind. But then I did. And she was 100% right. This free therapy. No, I don't remember everything.
Who else? Yes.
Desiree, you said that you didn't hear the announcement to go back upstairs. If you had, do you think you would have listened to it?
If Desiree had heard the announcement, she did not. An announcement was made in her building that it is all right to go back upstairs to your office. If she had heard it, would she have returned to the 101st floor?
This is a good question. I usually follow whatever people tell me to do, but my mother had said, call me when you get down to the bottom. So I was kind of following her directive at that point. You know, mom does know best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Please.
I know that you said that, 19 co-workers, and that must be hard because you probably wondering in your everyday life, why not me? Why they? And I'm sure you have a special place for each and every one of them in your heart. But it's, it always probably comes back to your mind.
It sort of sounds like you're asking about survivor's guilt in a way. I don't have survivor's guilt. I don't know why. I have a very deep faith. I've always had a strong religious background. So when I left the buildings, the floors were empty. So in my mind, everybody got out safely. It wasn't until 2 days later when the telephone started ringing, did I see this person? Did I see that person? Did it dawn on me that we lost people on my floor? It just didn't dawn on me because I was one of the last ones to leave the floor.
So I know you didn't ask me, but I'll say something. Interestingly enough, I do have survivor's guilt, not because anybody was killed in my company or even anybody I know. I don't know a single person that was killed, so I'm lucky. But I don't have children, and so many mothers were killed, and I still to this day wonder, why was I lucky enough to get out? Like, why one mother could have raised her kid or children. And I'm not saying my mother wouldn't have missed me. Somebody would have missed me, but not a child. And the way I deal with that is just, I do this because I speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves.
If you should think of another question, we're going to wrap up now. The girls will be right outside the door. If you would like to ask more questions, they'll be very happy to continue this. We want to thank you. You chose to spend some of your time here at the museum with us, and we thank you for that.